Hi everyone, welcome to Introduction to TESOL class. In this video, I'm going to elaborate some crucial points in assessing language performance. At the end of the course, you are able to first, identify and elaborate key concepts in assessing language performance. Second, identify differences and intersection of the concept of evaluation, assessment, and testing. Third, to identify and elaborate different types of testing, types of test item. And the last one is to describe and illustrate techniques and tasks or activities in authentic assessment. Okay, now please take a look at some examples of the speaking test items. The first one is reading aloud. Does this task test speaking? I'll give you some time to read it. Next, take a look at another example. These ones are two pictures. The students are asked to talk about information in the pictures. Does this task test speaking? Again, I'll give you some time to read it. After you study the two examples, which one is better at testing speaking skills? Reading aloud or talking about information in the pictures? Yes, the correct one is talking about information in the pictures. Now, my question is, how do you know what made one of these tasks are more suitable than others? I believe some of you have some reasons in your mind. From the previous examples, we know that the tasks are designed for assessing speaking skill. In this case, we must produce the language, involve creativity. It involves more fluency in task 2 and much more reading in task 1. The first task simply involves producing words, and the second task is turning the ideas into language. That's the idea of spontaneous production. Therefore, the task 2 is more suitable for speaking test item. Next, we move on to the key concept of assessment. The first concept is assessment literacy. What is assessment literacy? It refers to understanding and being able to use the principles of assessment. Why is assessment literacy important? When you do some test, it is useful because it tells how well you are doing in English, even though you don't like the test so much. The second reason, showing that the best test should mirror what happens in the classroom. However, you sometimes focus on improving test scores instead of improving learning. I believe that everyone aims good score in any test. The next point is the value of assessment literacy. It refers to the positive impact of the test for learning. For students, assessment helps students. High-quality tests assist learning. Meanwhile, assessment also helps teacher because the teacher can develop, evaluate, and select tests. The second concept of assessment is validity. When we design a test item, we need to check the validity. Is the test measuring what it claims to be measuring? There are 6 components of validity, including test purpose, test takers, test construct, test task, test reliability, and test impacts. Let's discuss one by one. The first one is the test purpose. Why am I testing? To check learning at the end of a unit in school. The second one may be to diagnose what learners know and don't know. Or another purpose, to place learners into groups based on their ability. Or maybe to provide test takers with a certificate of language proficiency. Clearly, the different test purpose could result different kind of tests. The second one is test takers. Who am I testing? Maybe the elementary school students or teenagers at high schools, or maybe adults in the university, or maybe in the English for specific purposes, context such as doctors, sales, or engineers. And the next one is test construct. Test construct refers to what am I testing? For example, we test something broader, such as communicative language ability, or narrower, such as speaking ability, pronunciation, grammatical knowledge, or use of grammatical knowledge. That's the point of test construct. This is one of the most fundamental concepts in assessment. The next one, it is regarding test tasks. How am I testing the construct? To construct the grammar and vocabulary test, are we going to give multiple choice or another kind of test? To test reading ability, are we going to give a text or several texts and followed by questions? Then, for listening exam, are we going to give some lectures or series of short conversation followed by comprehension questions? Or maybe in writing ability test, what tasks are actually given to students? A short email? For speaking test, are we going to give individual tasks such as the example given at the beginning of the session, or to engage learner by conducting interactive face-to-face interview? Okay, we are moving on to the next part, scoring reliability. How am I scoring? For example, is the test going to be scored as correct or incorrect answer such as multiple choice? Or the test will be scored by trained teachers such as in listening and speaking test? Or are we going to score the test based on specific criteria as in vocabulary, grammar, essay, or other types of tests? To be sure, the scoring ability refers to how dependable the score of the tests are. To put it differently, how to make sure that the given test reflects the learner's ability in the classroom. The final key concept of validity is related to the test impact. It refers to how is the test benefiting learners? Is it supporting learning through using authentic tasks or engaging learners in situation which is similar with the one outside of the class? Or is the test benefiting the learners through all 4 language skills such as listening, speaking, reading, writing, because the English proficiency test covers those 4 skills? Or the learners get some benefits from formative feedback on performance? Now let's summarize what we have discussed so far. There are 6 key questions. Why am I testing? It refers to test purpose. Who am I testing? It refers to test takers. What I'm testing? It refers to test construct. And how am I testing? It refers to the test tasks. How am I scoring? It refers to the test reliability. And how is my test benefiting learners? It refers to test impact. To check your understanding, I'll give you some practices. I give you assessment situation and you must decide which concept it refers to. The first situation. When we are you use diagnostic test, which concept does it refer to? Do you have something in mind? Yes, the correct one is the concept of test purpose. Why? Because we set up the purpose or goals before conducting a diagnostic test. The second assessment situation. The role of the test task is in influencing what tasks will the teacher use in the classroom. So which concept does it refer to? Yes, the correct one is the concept of test impact, because we are looking for at effect of the test in the classroom. As a teacher, we need to consider the fitness purpose of the task for the test. So, to summarize, a test is never just valid. It is valid for a purpose. So, in other words, fitness for a purpose. Let's move to the next part regarding the differences and intersection among evaluation, assessment, and testing. When defined within an educational setting, assessment, evaluation, and testing are all used to measure how much of the assigned materials students are mastering, how well students are learning the materials, and how well students are meeting the stated goals and objectives. Although you have believed that assessments only provide instructors with information on which to base a score or grade, assessments also help you to assess your own learning. Let's discuss further one by one. A test or quiz is used to examine someone's knowledge of something to determine what he or she knows or has learned. Testing measures the level of skills or knowledge that has been reached. Meanwhile, evaluation is the process of making judgments based on criteria and evidence. And then assessment is the process of documenting knowledge, skills, attitudes, and beliefs, usually in measurable terms. The goal of assessment is to make improvements as opposed to simply being judged. In an educational context, assessment is the process of describing, collecting, recording, scoring, and interpreting information about learning. How are evaluation, test, and assessment related and different one to another? Let's see. A testing and assessment are similar in terms of measuring the level of skill or knowledge that has been reached. Now, let's see assessment and evaluation. The goal of assessment is to make improvements as opposed to simply being judged. In an educational context, assessment is the process of describing, collecting, recording, scoring, and interpreting information about learning. On the other hand, evaluation is the process of making judgments based on criteria and evidence. Let's discuss a little more on assessment. There are two kinds of assessment. The first one is a formative. Formative assessment directs the teaching methods and practices by providing information on how well a student has learned a specific concept. Meanwhile, summative assessment gather information and show how a student is able to use it in a new context. Begin creating lesson activities by first identifying the standard that you wish to address. Then, decide how it is best to assess the student's comprehension on the standard. Finally, create an activity that will teach the student the information that they need to complete the assessment. Let's move on to the next part regarding the types of testing. There are 5 types of testing covering placement test, diagnostic test, progress or achievement test, proficiency test, and portfolio assessment. Let's discuss further on each type. The first one is placement test. The placement test is to place learners in the right class or levels. It is usually based on syllabus and used once the learner's level has been decided on. And the test is to assess students' productive and receptive skill. The second one is diagnostic test. It is to expose learner difficulties, gaps in their knowledge, and skill deficiencies during a course. When we know what the problems are, we can do something about them. The third is progress or achievement test. These tests are designed to measure learners' language and skill progress in relation to the syllabus they have been following. Progress tests are given to students every week to see how well they are doing. In this way, they can form part of a program of formative assessments. Meanwhile, the achievement test is given at the end of course or semester. It is usually called summative. The fourth one is proficiency test. Proficiency tests give a general picture of a student's knowledge and ability rather than measure progress. They are frequently used as stages people have to reach if they want to be admitted to a foreign university, get a job, or obtain some kind of certificate. Most public examinations are proficiency tests of this type. Let's see some examples. The next one is portfolio assessment. It provides evidence of students' effort. It helps students become more autonomous, and it can foster student reflection and help them to self-monitor their own learning. It is based on Nunes 2004. It has clear validity since, especially with written work, students will have had a chance to edit before submitting their work. It is time-consuming, and in the second place, teachers will need clear training in how to select items from the portfolio and how to give them grades. Now we are moving on the types of test item. There are two types of test item. The first one is direct test items. If it asks candidates to perform the communicative skill which is being tested. Second one is indirect test item types. It is to measure students' knowledge and ability by getting at what lies beneath their productive and receptive skills. When we are constructing direct test item, there are some aspects we need to take into account. The first one is create a level playing field. Receptive skill testing also needs to avoid making excessive demands on the student's general or specialist knowledge. And the second consideration that we need to replicate real-life interaction. Let's see some examples of direct test items. Here is the example of speaking test. The test is begun with questioning the test taker, then followed by information gap activities, decision-making activities, using pictures to compare and contrast, and the last step is role-play activities. The next example is in writing and reading test. You can see here some examples of writing tests, such as writing composition and stories, transactional letters, information leaflets, a set instruction for some common task, and newspaper articles about a recent event. And in reading test, maybe some example such as multiple choice question to test comprehension of a text, matching, transferring written information to chart, graphs, maps, etc., choosing the best summary of a paragraph or a whole text, matching jumbled headings with paragraphs, inserting sentences provided by the examiner in the correct place in the text. And the third example is in listening test. There are some examples here, such as completing chart with facts and figures from the listening text, identifying which of a number of objects is being described, identifying who says what, identifying whether speakers are enthusiastic, encouraging, in disagreement, or amused, or following directions on a map and identifying the correct house or place. The second test is indirect test item. Let's see some examples. Multiple choice questions. I think you are familiar with this. Okay, here is the examples. And this is the most common test item. Second example is close procedures. Here are some examples like filling the blank in the paragraphs. I believe you are also familiar with this kind of test item. Let's see the third example, transformation and paraphrase. Again, I think you are familiar with this kind of test item. For example, I'm sorry that I didn't get her an anniversary present, and you are expected to change or to transform the sentences by using wish. Next is sentence reordering. Okay, I think you are really familiar with this kind of test items. So this is jumbled words, and then you are expected to reorder into the correct sentences. Now we come to the last part of the lesson regarding authentic assessment. What is authentic assessment? Here I share some definition proposed by some practitioners and researchers. According to Moria et al., authentic assessment is assessing students' performance in the real-life context. Based on Guliker et al., authentic assessment is to evaluate students' knowledge that is realistic and relevant and applicable for them in real-life experience. And according to Alphonse Zulianti, authentic assessment refers to multiple forms of assessment that is consistent with the classroom goals, curriculum, and instruction and reflects students' learning process, achievements, motivation, and attitude. And the last, based on Zime, the authentic assessment evaluates not only the products, but also the process involved. According to Brown, there are 8 characteristics of authentic assessment. The first one is requires student to perform, create, produce, or do something. Second, it uses real-world context or simulation. The third is it uses a real-world The third one is non-intrusive in that it extended the day-to-day activity. And the fourth one allows students to be assessed on what they usually do in class every day. The next, it uses a task, that represent meaningful instructional activities. The next one, it focuses on process as well as product. It taps into higher level thinking and problem solving skill. And the last one, it provides information about strengths and weakness of students. Now, let's see the types of authentic assessment. There are 6 types, including performance-based assessment, portfolio, journal, conferences and interview, observation, self and peer assessment. It is according to Brown and Abewikrama. That brings me to the end of video. I've talked about 4 main points. There are key concepts of assessment, which includes validity and reliability components, differences and intersection among evaluation, assessment, and testing, the types of testing and testing items, and the last one is authentic assessment. To check your understanding, please take a look at the assignment. Find one example of assessment of a particular language skill. You may choose listening, speaking, reading, or writing in any textbook. And after that, you analyze the example that you found based on your understanding of assessment concept. It is related to the validity concept, reliability concept, testing types, test item types, and authentic assessment, etc. And after that, type in Word file and submit in UVC. The further information of submission, please check on Ukrida virtual class. Okay, thank you. And I hope this is beneficial to sharpen your knowledge regarding to assessing language performance.